Today on Inspirational People, Inspirational Stories, I'm joined by Richard Susskind. Richard is a visiting professor at Oxford Internet Institute. He's also a former technology advisor to the Lord Chief of Justice of England and Wales, and he's one of the world's leading experts even, in terms of AI that will reshape law, work, and society. He's written 11 books, including The Future of the Professions and How to Think About AI. He's over here in Ireland this month speaking at the Pendulum Summit, and when I realised what a true inspiration he truly is, I just knew I had to have him on the show. Richard, welcome to the show.
Doug, great to be here. Thank you very much. Looking forward.
I know you kind of see yourself as half a lawyer man and half a AI tech guy, but I'd really like to focus in on the AI and tech because obviously that's something that's been talked about a lot, and I know the interlink for you. But I was out having a little hike with my son the other day, and he's 20 years of age in Trinity College, Dublin, and he was talking about AI, and he said, "Dad, do you think AI in some way or form takes away from our divine creativity as human beings because our right brain creative side might be diminished after a while in terms of all this AI creativity as well?" And I'd love to know how you'd answer my son in terms of that first question.
I think there are two different issues that he raises. One is very practical. Can machines be creative? And the second is a far bigger issue, which is the extent to which we as humans have any divine rights to anything. So if we are developing a whole set of systems that are going to be more capable than us, to what extent do we feel that we are and always will be superior, not in virtue of our capabilities, but in virtue of our humanity? So your clearly very bright son has raised some fascinating issues for us to unpack. The creativity one is amazing, really, because I go right back to the 80s where people were asking the same question. I was involved in AI in the early 80s. Can machines ever be creative? And I think people who wrote about that subject then would be completely amazed now by the way you can simply go onto a system such as ChatGPT and ask it to write a little Scottish folk song or a limerick or a short story or a detailed analysis of some complex aspect of quantum physics. We have tools now that produce stuff that if we thought they were produced by humans, we would call them creative. Now, I question whether or not creative is the right word for what it is these machines do when they're putting together a new configuration of words or images or sounds. But if the question is, can machines generate stuff that we don't already have that is new and often to a higher quality than humans, the answer to that is already yes. And the machines are getting increasingly capable. So I would say that these systems are able to generate little songs to a far higher standard than almost all of humanity. Similarly, they're able to write documents and produce line drawings and so forth. So whether or not one wants to call that creativity, which is quite a human term, humans creativity, that's our way of generating new stuff, I don't know. But and this goes to the heart of one of the things I write a lot about, it's whether or not you are interested in the outcomes of these systems or whether or not you're interested in how they work. If you're interested in how systems and humans work, then there's a fascinating contrast between the creative human brain and mind on the one hand and the machine on the other. If you're interested simply in output, that's to say what appears on the paper, on the piece of paper, then machines on any view are already behaving in a creative way. So that's the more practical question. The philosophical question that he raises, and to some extent we're jumping to the end of any conversation on AI. If we're developing systems that are becoming much more capable than us, and this is something I think, Doug, we will discuss at greater length, if we are developing such systems, to what extent, if they really are unfathomably more capable than us, to what extent do we as humans who've enjoyed dominion on Earth for as long as we've been around, to what extent are we still entitled to hold the keys to the kingdom? Now, I don't think we should answer that question quite yet. Let's take ourselves through a whole bundle of other backup issues or background issues, and then we can maybe address this towards the end of our conversation. But what I would say to you, just in case we don't get there, is that the question is actually in some ways a theological question. Because what I find is that people who believe in the sanctity of human life, people who believe in the value, the great value of the human spirit and of the soul, take a very different view from many more scientific oriented people who believe that we are developing systems that will be more capable than us and will in due course replace us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll leave that then to later on to come back to. But
Yeah, let's
imagine
park the future of humanity.
park that bit.
Yeah.
But imagine we hadn't met, and imagine I meet you at the, say, the dinner at the Pendulum Summit, which is always a great dinner. It has lots of great, all the speakers generally go. If I was to ask you and I didn't know who you were, how do you normally explain to a person what you do?
It is with considerable difficulty because I am genuinely half a lawyer and half a technologist. I have this background where I have experience and qualifications in both areas. And I struggle a little bit to describe what I do because it's a mix. I am, I suppose, a portfolio person. That's to say, there's a variety of things I do. So I write books, I do a lot of public speaking, I advise major organizations in the private sector, I advise governments, I advise judiciaries. I do some teaching at university as well, all in and around a certain number of themes which are about the future of technology, its impact on professional work. My background, I suppose, is partly law and technology, but also I'm interested in philosophy and I'm interested in long-term thinking and long-term planning. So I bring this rather weird mixture of things together, and happily, people seem to want to pay to read what I say about it, hear what I speak about it, and take my advice. I think about the long term. And so I'm not, for example, as many other people are who do great work, I'm not interested in particular in the very latest version of a particular AI system. I'm interested in the broad contours. Where is this taking humanity and civilization?
I love that. And a lot of people think that AI kind of kicked off in November 2022 when ChatGPT came around. But I think you'll tell a slightly different story because it was about 1980 or something like that when you first got into AI. Is that right?
Yeah, I wasn't a new boy either. I date 1950. I provide 1950 as the starting date for AI. That was the year in which Alan Turing, the great Alan Turing, asked the question in a famous article, "Can machines think?" And I think serious debate and development followed from that. That was 1950. The term itself was invented in 1956, when a group of scholars in Dartmouth in the United States were getting together for a summer workshop. And in the funding proposal for that workshop, the term was invented by a guy called John McCarthy. And so we've had this technology in one way or another around for years. But I suppose we've had it in classical antiquity too. There's hints of it in Homer. If you go fast forward many centuries, there's a little bit, of course, of it in Frankenstein and H.G. Wells and George Orwell and so forth. So our fiction, to some extent, ran in advance of our science. But the science of AI began about 75 years ago. And what was interesting, Doug, was that in the early years of AI, and I came in 30 years after that, so as I say, I was a new kid in the block. But in the early years, we saw breakthroughs every maybe 5 to 10 years. We're now seeing breakthroughs, I believe, every 6 to 12 months. So the trajectory, the shape of the progress has changed radically. So I've been working the field for 44 years. I say completely honestly, we've seen far more in the last 4 years than I saw in the previous 40. And it's at this time that you and I are getting together to discuss what I believe is the defining technology, probably the defining issue of our age, which is the future impact of AI in society and humanity and Earth.
Absolutely. And do you think, as humanity, are we underestimating AI or are we overhyping it at the moment?
There isn't a single view. The first thing I often say is that AI is not like a football team. You don't need to support it or not support it. You don't need to be in favor or not in favor. It's entirely coherent to be both optimistic about its future and pessimistic about its future. That's to say, if you take the optimistic side, I believe that AI will help a number of global problems that we face. One is the access to health problem, and others access to justice problem, and others access to education, others climate crisis. I believe in a variety of ways AI will help us address and overcome some of the major issues that we as humans face on the one hand. On the other hand, there's a mountain range of risks. The notion of some of these very powerful systems being in the hands of bad actors, the idea that this technology might radically affect white collar workers, the idea that people might rely on these systems and they'll be simply unreliable. So, this is why I say that balancing the benefits and the drawbacks of AI is a defining issue. I think I put it more formally, I say saving humanity with and from AI is the defining challenge of our era.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're on the legal side as well. And I have to say, it has been incredibly useful for me because I had a contract for a training company to go in there. And I put the contract, which was a long contract, through ChatGPT, and it picked up a few things that I would have missed. And that was very useful in terms of being able to go back and say, hold on a minute, who owns the IP if I bring in my own stuff? And it was a really good thing. And on that, you mentioned that a
I
bit.
mean, can I just jump in? And this
Yeah,
gives us an early glimpse. A, how phenomenally empowering
yeah.
that we can at least see a future in which people who are not lawyers and cannot afford lawyers can themselves receive high quality legal guidance. But the second point is that we're not quite there yet. These systems aren't entirely reliable. And this is something that, of course, is debated both in the AI community and more broadly, that we're already putting out systems on which people will rely, and so far they're not entirely trustworthy. In many contexts, the question is not so much are they perfect, but are they better than nothing at all? But in some contexts, we have to use these with caution. For example, in relation to our health, in relation to our legal entitlements. But I believe these systems are advancing at such a rate that very soon we will regard them as much more reliable than not having them at all. And that goes back to my earlier question of the or issue about the global health crisis and the global legal crisis. Just now, across so many parts of our world, most people cannot afford and don't have access to medical help. Most people can't afford and don't have access to legal guidance. And so these systems offer us some insight into how we might radically change and empower so many people.
I agree. I think there will be a lot of, and I'd like to ask you about this because obviously you wrote a book in, well, both books kind of link into this in terms of which kind of jobs will be taken or change them, and which of the jobs or work are at the most risk over the next 5 or 10 years. One of the things I did notice myself, because I'm obviously into mental health and helping people in terms of that kind of stuff, and I did test ChatGPT, and I did notice that a lot of people are using it as a psychologist, and yet it does make mistakes. And I
Mm.
think that's something that people need to be aware of. There was something to do with one of my family members where I asked its viewpoint of how I should play out the scene, and it gave the wrong advice. And actually, I used the opposite advice, and it worked very well. So I would just say people need to be careful in that.
I think this is the double-edged aspect of it. And I understand that people are, it's one of the, I think it's the third most popular use of AI systems just now is for some kind of personal counseling. And of course, you hear some dreadful stories, awful stories about people taking their own lives on the basis of its advice. I think one has to know far more about each individual case before one draws general conclusions. But looking forward and more optimistically, I say to you that yes, of course, they make mistakes just now, but these systems are becoming better and better. And wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone had at their fingertips access to warm, apparently warm, friendly, useful guidance on almost every issue? We have to be careful, and I suspect many people listening in are middle class, relatively affluent, professional people, business people who actually have access to other humans to help them. Most people don't. And so we have to be careful about being too dismissive too quickly about facilities that are still at their early stages, but are getting better and better. And anyone who reads about the whole field of so-called disruptive technologies will know that disruptive technologies in their early years tend to underperform, but they get better and better because there's clearly market need and market interest. And my overall view is that the market will show no loyalty to our traditional ways of working. if AI systems can help us solve our problems or deliver us the outcomes we require in ways that are cheaper or quicker and better.
Yeah, I love that. And part of that question, obviously, I asked as well, which kind of jobs do you think are most at threat in terms of AI?
That is, as we all know, it's one of the big questions. Let me start at a high level and say that I think that's a question that is one of the most significant socioeconomic questions of the next decade, and I think it's a question that most government and business leaders are dodging just now. All the evidence suggests that more and more of the tasks that are undertaken by white collar workers will, to some extent, be taken on by AI systems. We're used to the idea of machines in our fields, machines in our factories. We're far less used to the idea than machines taking on tasks that we used to think were the exclusive province of humans with our remarkable brains and minds. And an early observation I want to make is that most people, you mentioned a book earlier that I co-authored a book with my son Daniel, published over 10 years ago now, called The Future of the Professions, where we were looking at the impact of AI across 8 different professions. And we found it really entertaining, and we continue to see this, that everyone sees far greater scope for AI in professions other than their own. So everyone does this exception arguing, this special pleading for themselves. Doctors will say there's no room for this in healthcare, but clearly lawyers and accountants need to move on. And even within law, people say, well, of course, the word of course is used a lot. Real estate lawyers will be replaced by this technology, but if you're a corporate lawyer, litigator, you're safe. And I just want to say there must be a rational corner of all of our minds that recognizes that if AI is affecting almost all work, it's unlikely that your particular area is the exception. There's 2 ways in which to look at this, though. On the one hand, there is this idea of task automation and task substitution, and this has preoccupied many academics and many economists and many management consultants. And so the kind of research you might read on the future of jobs and which jobs are safe and which are not do something like this. They look at jobs, they break the jobs down into tasks, and they ask the question, where can we take out a human and plug in a machine? And if you can do that quite a lot, the job's under threat. And if you can't do very much, the job's safe. And that's the kind of analysis. Even fairly high-powered academics and consultants are putting this kind of stuff out. And it's not wrong, but it's a very limited view that if we are thinking that the impact of AI on work is simply what I call automation, which is computerizing, systematizing, streamlining, optimizing what we already do. I think there's a far deeper challenge here. And let me use as an example of this, the world of healthcare. I was invited some years ago to give a talk to 2,000 neurosurgeons in Boston. It's a scary audience. And they asked me to answer the question, what is the future of neurosurgeons? And my opening line was something like this. I said, patients don't want neurosurgeons. Gasping audience. I said, patients want health. I said, for most health problems, particularly the kind of problems you deal with, you're the best answer we've got today, and thank goodness for you. But I said, do you not think in 20 years' time people will look back and say, so it's unbelievable how often we used to cut bodies open? Because I said there that day, surely the future of healthcare is not simply robotic surgery, which is to say task substitution, but surely it's non-invasive therapy and preventative medicine. And non-invasive therapy and preventive medicine introduced 2 new categories that I talk about in my book. One is innovation in a very specific sense, by which I mean using technology to allow us to do things that previously weren't possible. So this is an amazing opportunity using AI technology to help people with their medical or historically surgical problems, not by cutting them open, but by AI-enabled non-invasive services. And that's business people, professionals listening in, that's your challenge, not simply to automate what you already do, and frankly, probably do rather well. Your challenge is to do, where's the equivalent of non-invasive therapy, giving our customer what they want, but in a way that's quicker, cheaper, less painful. But the second thing that I learned in that discussion about surgery is about preventative medicine, that most people prefer a problem avoided to a problem solved. And so much of what we do in the workforce is about problem solving. And I call this the eliminative function of AI, where AI is going to not eliminate the jobs, although that may happen. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about eliminate the problems for which the jobs exist. And so
Mm.
when you ask me what's the impact of AI on work, I think we need a richer analysis than what can AI systems do that humans can do. Let's evaluate how safe our job is by reference to how we currently work, because the way we work in the future is going to be radically changed. So I ask a slightly different question. I ask a question: when is it intrinsically important that humans are involved in any particular type of work? Now, philosophers draw a distinction between intrinsic significance and consequential significance, or sometimes they call it instrumental significance. So something's intrinsically important if it's important for its own sake. It's consequentially or instrumentally significant simply because it brings about a certain kind of outcome. So going back to my doctor's example, say patients don't really want doctors. Doctors, they want health. So the outcome is health. But the question we need to ask is, therefore, when is it intrinsically important for humans to be involved? That's to say, it's not just about the outcome. It really matters to people that there are humans involved. Now, many people, like my wife, for example, as a psychotherapist, will say it's intrinsically important in the world of psychotherapy that it's humans interacting with one another. And others will say, well, actually, people don't really want psychotherapists. What they want is peace of mind. And if these AI systems bring peace of mind, then what you might have thought was a safe job may actually no longer be a safe job. So I think the question is a tricky one, and my a lot also depends on timescales, because we've got to distinguish between the advance of technology, which is really happening at a stunning rate, and the adoption of technology, which for regulatory reasons or economic reasons or for cultural reasons might happen more slowly. But if you believe, as I do, that our machines are becoming increasingly capable at an explosive rate, it's hard to avoid the conclusion there's just going to be less for almost all of us to do. And when I look around the worlds I'm familiar with in professional services, it's quite hard to identify areas of professional service where what's really important is that there's a human being involved, as opposed to what's really important is delivering a result. I often think of tax in this context, that I think it's about 50% of people in the United States now use an online tax service rather than a human tax expert to deliver their tax return. And my little joke here is very few of these people are complaining about the loss of social interaction with their tax advisor. Now, everyone finds that quite amusing, other than tax advisors. The point is that we humans often say to me, "Oh, what a professional say to me, what my clients want a face-to-face interaction with a trusted personal advisor." I'm saying, I'm just not that sure that's right. I just think they want their problem solved, their problem avoided, or their issue handled. And again, I'll say, it's a phrase I use often, the market isn't going to show any loyalty to the human way of doing things if the output, the outcome that's required by the market is delivered in a way that's cheaper or quicker or better. My overall view is that we are going to see over the next 5 to 15 years an unprecedented impact on the workforce, a hollowing out, where so much that's already done within our workforce will be done by machines. And we are so ill prepared for that, both economically and socially and psychologically, it's hard to know where to begin.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that in a minute. One thing you said about your wife, which I do get what your wife's saying, is because I think with a psychotherapist, sometimes somebody needs presence, they need the energy, they need the empathy, and maybe even a hand on the shoulder as well. So maybe that's what she's referring to a little
Yeah,
bit
but one needs to, and I don't argue with that. I certainly don't argue with her about it. But I think
there.
one has to distinguish between two different situations
Yeah.
where people cannot afford or would not have access to any conventional psychotherapeutic help. And so that's the is something better than nothing, and it isn't always, but that's a different case from the is this here's someone who's prepared to pay £100 an hour for some cognitive behavioral therapy. they've got to balance that up against, of course, there's some quite useful online tools. And some you're absolutely right, say, I'm not interested in online tools. I want a human being. I want to feel someone else empathizing with me. And others say, oh, well, I'll have a go at the AI system. And my point is that if if for the patient, what's really important of intrinsic significance is interaction with another human, then that role is safe insofar as that's what the market wants. But if, as I say, people aren't really interested in that, or not always, they're interested in peace of mind, then you can see how that role, that job, that work will be affected.
I agree. And I think, look, and why do people go to the Pendulum Summit? Because then they're in the energy of the speaker. And even doing this podcast with you now, I've seen you on YouTube over the last few days in lots of different speeches and lots of different podcasts. But actually being in your presence, even though it is online, is different. And I think that, and then being able to feel that energy and get the response and the interest, I think it makes a massive
I
difference.
think it does, but again, I go back to this point that not everyone can go to the Pendulum Summit. I've got lots of people, for one reason or another, I've got lots of followers in the Brazilian legal community, which is massive. Believe it or not, the backlog of legal cases in Brazil is 80 or 90 million. There's
Wow.
1,200 law schools in Brazil. So I've got this following. I've been once. And so the question is, for example, a video recording of me better than nothing at all? And I think the answer is yes. How does it compare to me giving a keynote to the conference? Hopefully the keynote's better. Hopefully the personal interaction. So I try not in all these thinking to be too definitive or too dismissive or too uh, binary about it. Much of what I'm trying to achieve is not perfection through, not personally, but what I want to see through AI is not perfection, but improvement, a better world rather than a perfect world.
Yeah, and do you know what? I went to the Web Summit over in Lisbon just recently, and I don't know if you were there, but there was 75,000 people there, all talking AI sales, AI bots, and yet all 75,000 people were there going, "Hello, lovely to meet you." Really trying to make the connection through the heart, through the eyes, through the. So I think although these things, as you say, are going to change the way we do business, I think the human interaction, touch in terms of sales, relationships, marketing will still be there. It'll just be maybe slightly different.
I go back to that earlier point, though. We've got to make sure what we're not simply doing is grafting AI onto our current ways of working. We
Mm.
will look back in 10 years' time and chortle. We'll laugh at how we thought that AI would impact our work because I think we're of an automation mindset. We'll find entirely different ways of generating sales, of promoting our businesses, of running our organizations, of leading teams. And that really relates to a far bigger point that I want to make, Doug, and that is that we've seen the development of a number of technologies over the years. Of course, we have, and some have been more impactful than others. But I think what we're seeing in AI technology is really the confluence of two very significant changes. One is the change, the way in which we as humans store information and communicate with one another. So if you look across the history of humanity in the early years in primitive societies, there was no print, there was no script. People communicated orally. We call this the age of orality. And then we moved into a world where there was script or hieroglyphics, and then there was the invention of the printing press. And what's important to note in each of these transitions was that our social, economic, legal, political structures changed fundamentally as we move from these different ways of communicating. So that's one seismic shift. The second shift is the way in which we create economic value. If you think of hunter-gatherer societies and then the agrarian revolution, then again the industrial revolution, and again in each shift, we saw fundamental change in the economic, legal, political, uh, social structures of humanity. So that's, if you're a Marxist, you say what we're seeing is a change in the means of production, where economic value comes from. If you combine these two, that at the same time in human history, we're seeing a revolution in the way we communicate and a revolution in the way we create economic value. It's as though the printing press was invented in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. So, what we should be expecting, what we should be planning for, is not how do we squeeze these developments into our existing notion of the labor force, our industry, our existing notion of the legal system, of our health service, or of the political system. We should be expecting and planning for fundamental structural change. It's an entirely new era for humanity. And so the tendency to want to say things like, well, we've had changes in the past and we've accommodated, we've been flexible, there's nothing new in the world. I think all of that is naive. I think we're at the threshold of a new epoch for humanity. And there is a view that humanity may not live through this. And it was something I just wanted to say very quickly. I think there are, because I'm conscious we've only got so long we can speak. There are six different views on amongst AI specialists on the future of AI. The first is that it's all hype, that essentially these systems make mistakes, the data they rely upon is flawed. These will present in due course big commercial problems because we need to have humans in the loop and human supervision to make sure the systems can be used. The idea of running two expensive systems, humans and machines in parallel, won't make business sense. The bubble will burst and AI will, to some extent, recede. That's the hypothesis, as I call it. The second view is that what we have today, these remarkable generative AI systems, are going to become more and more reliable, more and more impressive. But that's about as far as AI is going to take us. That we're seeing the limits of AI, where what you do is you use oceans of data and you essentially create systems that can perform at a very high level. But people say that's not the same as a human being, and we'll go no further than that. That's the second hypothesis. Third hypothesis is the AGI hypothesis. That's artificial general intelligence. And this is the idea these systems, at some stage, will, across the full range of human cognitive tasks, will perform at the level of humans. They'll be as, not quite the right words, but they'll be as bright or as capable as us. So I'm speaking to a room of lawyers or doctors saying these systems will be able to do everything you can do. They won't deliver the outcomes that are expected of you in the same way, but they'll be able to perform. Their performance levels will be your level. The next hypothesis is, well, why would they stop there? If these systems themselves can write AI systems and AI system can write further AI systems, we're going to have an AI explosion, and these systems will be unfathomably more capable than us. The fifth hypothesis is we're going to merge with these systems. We call this the singularity. Humans and machines will have digital implants, expanding our consciousness and our intellectual capabilities. And the final hypothesis, and to some extent this brings us right back round to our original discussion, I call the AI evolution hypothesis, held by many cosmologists and scientists who say something like this. They say, look, the universe is 13.8 billion years old. Humanity is a few 100,000 years, just a blink in the eye in cosmic terms. It may well be that the only contribution to the cosmos that humanity will make is to develop these much more capable systems that will, in due course, replace us. So I'm sorry to spoil the days of those of you who are listening in, but that's a hypothesis. And I don't reject any of them. I just present them. I say, amongst the AI community, here's six different views of where all of this is heading. And it goes back to your son's question. If we can imagine unfathomably more capable systems, there's a very interesting, I said earlier, theological question about what do we owe the future and to whom do we owe it?
Mm.
Do we owe a duty to the future of humanity, or do we owe a duty, some sense, to create and spread this intelligence right across the cosmos? These are huge issues, which I love thinking about. And this is the joy of AI, that on the one hand, you can be thinking, how can this improve the efficiency and productivity of our business? And on the other hand, you can be thinking, what are humans for? And if you want a mainstream view within the AI development community, the big tech companies who are spending more on AI than we have spent on any single technology in history, they are generally going for AGI. They're
Mm.
in the business of trying to develop systems that can perform at human level. And therefore, as to your earlier question, its impact on the workforce, to think of systems that can perform at our level and yet somehow won't be adopted by the market seems to me to be naive. So this is going to call for all of us to think on behalf of the businesses we run, or if you're a government leader, the country that's your responsibility, or for parents for your children, to rethink what a meaningful life is and how we're going to coexist with these ever more capable systems. Now, I concede that some people listening in will think this is just so much nonsense. These systems, they will often say they just do statistical pattern matching. They are just ones and zeros. What's all the fuss about? Frankly, when you've got an AI guided missile coming towards your face, to say that it's simply ones and zeros won't impede its progress. That's to confuse what I call process thinking and outcome thinking. We become preoccupied with comparing how machines and humans operate and work rather than thinking what's their impact, their practical, their commercial, their social, their economic, their legal impact on society.
Oh, I love that. And I got two questions on what you said there, but I'm going to go to one because it's very much relevant to what you finished with there is you're going to be standing in the Pendulum Summit potentially, well, you are in a couple of weeks' time. There's going to be maybe, like this week, for example, myself, I've sat in front of three CEOs, all running between 50 to 100 million per annum businesses. And each of them said to me, okay, I know this AI stuff. It's really important, but where do I start?
Mhm.
So if you're talking now to if you're advising, say, let's say a CEO of the three guys that I can recall now, one is a software support company, one's an asset management company, small boutique one, and then one is a food manufacturing company. What would you say in general to a CEO of those kind of companies or others? Where do you research? Where do you find the best correct information to help them grow their business or implement AI in their business so they're not going down a rabbit hole of going down and taking the wrong stuff?
Well, the first bit of advice I give is a slightly different bit of advice, and that is to disentangle your thinking about the short-term impact of AI and the long-term impact of AI. As a generality, I think a lot of the commentary on AI is overstating its impact on business and government in the short term and understating it in the long term. So, in the short term, I think the impact of AI is, as to some extent hinted earlier, this is going to be an amazing productivity and efficiency tool for humans. In the short term, over the next 2 or 3 years, it's not going to turn the world upside down. It's going to change radically what we as humans can do in our productivity. But the business model may not be radically affected. So, one thing you've got to have a strand of thinking in your business: how do we make the most of this remarkable technology working as we currently do? Assume not much change in the business. How can we turbocharge our business through this AI technology? That is a very different question from the question of have we got a sustainable business in the long term? Is AI going to fundamentally disrupt or take away the very need for the kinds of services and products that we are providing? That needs a different mindset. So the first is tactical, short-term, opportunistic, commercial, and the second is more strategic. It's longer term. To some extent, it's more theoretical. It's more speculative because we don't know how it's going to end up. Now, the difference, in my view, between a leader and a manager is that there is a certain kind of person who say, "Look, we can't do all this future stuff. It's all speculative. It's all just airy fairy. Let's get on with the practical stuff." And I say that's a manager's view, just not really looking much more than a couple of months or a couple of years ahead. The great leaders I'm exposed to just now in business and government are those who are creating the space to think both about the opportunities and threats that this longer term disruption is likely to present. And it's very interesting when you speak, and I give lots of talk at board level to people, the difference around the table between those who are thinking, gosh, this is an entirely new way of satisfying our customers, our market's needs, as opposed to others are saying, how can we dig a moat around what we currently do so that competitors can't jump in? And, I look at the unbelievable global startup industry where you've got AI businesses, tens of thousands of them around the world, disrupting businesses. And I often say to established businesses that the competition that kills you won't look like you. It'll look very, very different indeed. And so that's part of the longer term thinking. Think what kind of organization could displace us in the market? Now, as for the short term thinking, a lot of that is about making the most of the products that are already out there. And there's lots of help, and there's lots of online help that can be gained just to see how does AI affect our industry today. The longer term requires a different kind of help, and that is of the long term strategists, the long term thinker, people who've got a deeper understanding of the contours and who are understanding notions like scenario planning and so forth. But the fundamental message to leaders is not to say, well, we'll sort out the short term and we can look at the long term at a later stage. You have to disentangle the two and run your short term opportunistic tactical response to AI in parallel with your long term strategic planning.
Lovely. And would your book, How to Think About AI, would that be a good one to read for some of these guys as well?
It's invaluable, Doug. What kind of question is that to ask an author?
Well, I'm trying to ask, tell us a little bit about the book then.
So the book, there are a couple of chapters which are very practical and commercial. The book it's my first go at writing a book for a general audience. So I'm trying to do a whole bundle of things, and it seems to be going down well. It's got lots of translations underway, so people seem to be enjoying it. What I was getting a little frustrated with was a lot of the technology debates quite technical. People are talking about large language models and back propagation and neural networks, and most leaders, their eyes glaze over within 10 seconds. And I go back to the 80s when I was involved with AI, an earlier form of AI. It's called rule-based expert systems. What was very interesting, we couldn't imagine at that stage a different way of doing AI. And when I say to people today, I know you're talking about ChatGPT, I know you're talking about LLMs, large language models, and you're preoccupied with them. They are amazing, but I do think in not many years we'll look back and smile and think it's funny that we thought that was the only way of doing AI. So what I'm trying to do in the book is look beyond the technologies of the day and give people some general understanding of how this technology evolved and how it will impact on us. So I talk about things like the difference between automating what we already do and doing different things. I talk about the risks and how we might respond to them. I talk about the ethics. I talk about the legalities. And so and I talk about the philosophical and even metaphysical impact. So is there stuff there for the person who's quite action oriented? Absolutely. But my project was a broader one, which was to try and write a book which bright people would find intellectually stimulating. And so you might get a CEO picking up and saying, I want to know what I want to do on Monday. And then thinking, oh gosh, this is interesting. Never looked at the world this way. So I'm trying to essentially zoom out and widen people's horizons.
Lovely. And my question for you is, and it's interlinked to AI, have you got an audio version of it yet?
Yes. And funnily enough, I read that myself, which I thought I was going to
That was
read.
my question.
Yeah, well, there you
Did
go.
you not get an AI
Yeah,
voice version of this?
well, yes. So, and this goes back to our earlier question. I can imagine a future where in which a book might read it better than me, but not yet. And I'm probably doing my not us thinking there. It was slightly indulgent in the sense that quite often people just they get actors and other people to read the book. And I've done that previously, and I wasn't entirely happy with it. And so I thought I'd have a go. And people say, you've got a Scottish accent. People, it's partly a believable accent. Why not do it? So it's a 3-day exercise. And it's quite a short book, and you go into a little box, get your headphones on, and you read it out, and there's someone at the other end correcting you every 10 seconds. But it's actually really good fun because it's once you've given yourself over to the process, once you've accepted this is how I'm spending the next 3 days of my life, you can play little games and say, okay, I just want each sentence to be as good as I can make it. So that was how I got through it, as it were, and in the end, really enjoyed doing it. And I have a nice feedback on it. And it is interesting that I think, as opposed to an actor or certainly a current AI system, I can infuse the words with a sense of feeling and a nuance and an emphasis that it might be harder. I know what I'm trying to say when I'm writing. But the other thing you find out is you read things and, oh my goodness, did I actually write that? How the language is dreadful or it's so cumbersome and so forth. And quite often I was wanting to say, can I change that? And they don't allow you to change it because you're reading a version of the book. So it's a good experience. And good
I'll be
feedback.
getting it. I'm gonna. I haven't read it yet, but I'm gonna get it, and I'm gonna
A
listen.
wonderful cure for insomnia.
Well, I always tend to listen to books while I'm running or walking. So
Yeah.
you'll be listened to, your voice will be listened to while I'm on the cliffs here in Howth, running along next to the seaside. So it'd be a nice place as well. And actually, one of the things you made me think about, because I asked the question, did you read it yourself or did you get an AI to do it? Is that I actually think that going forward, I think potentially, because my daughter's an artist, for example, I think people will be rewarded more for actually doing real art or real poetry or real stuff in artistic fashion. But I think in business fashion, I think you're totally right. I think, it's going to be AI all the way.
Yeah, I think I often, in the context of art, and I often think of, and I talk about this in my book, you could imagine a robot running 100 meters quicker than Usain Bolt. It might already be the case. But most of us, unless you're interested in robotics, wouldn't be that interested to watch that. What interests us and fascinates us and inspires us is that it's another human, someone, frankly, in the broadest of terms, like us, performing at such a high level. And it's true when you hear musicians or when you see great art. And I think when you ask the question, what jobs there are in the future, I could imagine a machine, an android, doing a fair Hamlet. But I think we want to see another human being. So that goes back to my earlier distinction. I think in sport and in performing arts, the fact there's human involvement is intrinsically important.
Mm.
And so I think what you're saying about art and so forth is bang on, that it does match, it will matter to us that there's a human at the other end. That so one can imagine music or literature that is of a higher quality generated by machine, but we might still want the interaction that we have with another human when we engage with their art form.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love that. And I think we're running out of time. So and I'm really looking forward for you coming over, and I'm sure people are going to be sitting on the edge of their seats as well. And any last thoughts of what you see in the future? And also, how can people get in touch with you? Because obviously you do a lot of amazing, I've seen you on YouTube after YouTube doing some amazing speeches, and I think you could add so much value to so many companies out there. How can people get in touch with you to be able to bring you in as well?
Oh, that's very kind. It's my Christian name at surname.com. So I'm Richard at Susskind.com or my website, Susskind.com. But if you search for my name, that takes you fairly quickly to my website. And always delighted to speak at appropriate events. I love doing it. This goes back to the earlier question. I'm not a robot up there, and hopefully for some time yet, people will prefer the real rather than the virtual version of me.
Oh, 100%. Richard, it has been an absolute pleasure having the show. I wish you every success with your trip over to Ireland and going forward as well with the book sales and the audiobook sales and everything. And I thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, the pleasure was mine. Thank you very much, Doug.
My name's Doug Gordon, and you've been listening to Richard Susskind on Inspirational People, Inspirational Stories. I'll be back next week with another inspirational guest. In the meantime, if you need to get in touch, please contact me at doug@dougdgordon.com. From all here and the team of the show, I wish you a truly inspirational week and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.